Hello, fifth grade. Welcome to Math for Monday. Please make sure that you have the following items with you here as you watch this lesson. Can you make sure you have your textbook and then either a notebook or piece of paper, or if you happen to have a small whiteboard at home that you can work on, that works well also. So if you need to pause the video, go get those items. You can do that and come right back. And what we're going to do today is we're basically just going to review the topic of average. It's been a couple of weeks and we need to sort of stop and look back and refresh our memory on what we already learned about. What is average? How do you calculate it? And how do you calculate a total from the average? So I'm just going to basically review 3 lessons in one. So hopefully this is all very familiar to you. Now, on the board I've drawn, if you remember when we first started looking at average, everybody had a piece of paper in which you drew 5 large circles. And then I handed out beans. Hopefully you remember that. And I had everybody put the following numbers of beans inside their circles on their paper. You had 2 beans in the first circle, 3 in the second, 4 in the third, 5 in the fourth, and 6 in the sixth. And I said, well, first of all, we'll notice that all circles have different amounts of beans in them. Well, how many total beans are there? And we added them up. We added 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6, and we found that our total number of beans was 20. We said, okay, so what would you do? How would you rearrange the beans so that there were the same number of beans in each circle? And remember, you worked hard on that and moved your beans around, and basically what we found was that when you rearranged the 20 beans and distributed them evenly among the 5 circles, that each circle contained 4 beans. So, mathematically, what we did is we calculated the average. Well, we showed, with the beans, we calculated the average by adding together all of the beans. That was our total. And then we divided that total by the number of circles, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that gave us our average number of beans, which was 4 per circle. So that was our hands-on way of showing that this is how you calculate average. So hopefully you remember that. Then I'm going to switch over to our textbook. Then we looked at some sample problems with some pictures of what it would look like to calculate average. And just, mathematically, let me just write that down. What we did was we took 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6. We got a total of 20. That was our total. And then we divided it by the number of circles to get 4, which was our average. Okay. Now let's take a look at some pictures from your textbook that illustrate this same point. So I'm going to hope this shows up here on I might need to stand on this side, on the projector here. So for the first page, we're on page 38 of the textbook. This should look familiar to you. This is a picture of 3 bags of oranges. And you'll notice that every bag has a different amount of oranges in them. But the question is, if these oranges are rearranged so that the bags have the same number of oranges, how many oranges will there be in each bag? Well, to determine that, first thing we need to do is get the total number of oranges. We're going to have to add up how many oranges there are from each bag. The first bag has 4, so we'll start with that number. The second bag has 9, and the third bag has 5. And as you can see on the page, when you add those together, you get a total of 18 oranges. So if you were to distribute those 18 oranges evenly throughout the 3 bags, well, you just divide 18 by 3, and you would determine that there would be 6 oranges in each bag. So, therefore, the average of 4, 9, and 5 is 6. We've just found the average of the numbers 4, 9, and 5. And then we looked at another example of some abacuses, those counting devices. And we saw that here are 4 abacuses, and this first one has 7 beads on it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Second one has 3. third one has 4, and the fifth one has 6. And we want to know what is the average number of beads on these 4 abacuses. Well, what would that look like? Well, if we could add all the beads together, 7 plus 3 plus 4 plus 6, we would find out that there are 20 beads total. And if we rearranged the beads so that there was an even number of beads on each abacus, there would be, as you can see, 5 on each abacus. And we determine that by adding up the beads, getting a total number, which is 20, and then dividing that total by the number of groups, or the number of abacuses, 1, 2, 3, 4. 20 divided by 4. So the average then is 5. There's an average of 5 beads per abacus. And then we looked at another picture example, and this is just number 2 on page 39. This shows a picture graph of boys who caught fish. So Ahmad, each fish, picture of a fish stands for one fish. He caught 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fish. Chandran caught 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fish. And Jinfa caught 3 fish. So what is the average number of fish that each boy caught? Well, to determine that, again, we add up everybody's amount. So Ahmad had 5. Chandran had 7. Jinfa had 3. So the total number of fish caught by all the boys was 15. So that gives us the total. How do we find the average? Well, once we have the total, to find the average, we divide the total by the number of groups. And right here, there are just 3 boys. Those would be the groups. So 15 divided by 3, as you know, is 5. So on the average, each boy caught 5 fish. So those were some picture examples. So now let's go back to looking at some just word problems where you would calculate average. So I'm now turning to page 40 on in your textbook, and we're looking at the problem number 3 at the top of the page, and it says Sally collected 36 stamps, Mary collected 38 stamps, and Lillian collected 40 stamps. What was the average number of stamps each girl collected? Okay, so there's 3 of them, and they all collected different amounts. But if we could distribute all the total amount of stamps evenly among each girl, that would be the average. So how would we calculate that? Well, first we calculate the total. So the total is going to be equal to everybody's stamps added together. So Sally collected 36, so we'll start with her. Mary collected 38, and Lillian collected 40. So it's as simple as adding those up, and when you add those together, you should get 114 total stamps. Now, to calculate the average, we're going to divide that total by the number of groups. We're going to divide that by the number of groups. In other words, there are 3 girls collecting stamps. So 114 divided by, we could just say number of groups, is going to give you the answer, the average. So now you probably can't calculate that mentally, so you would want to go off to the side and do the algorithm for that. And when you did, you would find that you should get 38 stamps is your average. Okay? So one thing I want to point out here that you probably remember me saying is that you need to check your answer to make sure that it's reasonable. And we said there's a rule for averages. And the first rule is that your average, so here's our average, 38, your average can never be lower than your lowest value or number. So let's check it. 38 is, so first of all, 36 is the lowest number. It's not lower than 36, so that's good. The second rule of thumb is that your average can never be higher than your highest number. Our highest number here for the original values that we added together is 40, so check, 38 is not greater than 40. So check your answer to make sure that it's reasonable by comparing your average to your values that you added together to get your total. Again, it can't be lower than the lowest number, can't be less than the lowest number, and it can't be greater than the highest number. So hopefully you remember us pointing that out. All right, let's look at another example to refresh your memory here. Now I'm still on page 40. Actually, I'm going to not do that one just yet. I'm going to actually go back and point out another thing that we did. If you'll remember, we also took a survey around the room. I asked everybody approximately how many trees are there in your yard. And remember, everybody sort of, estimated about how many trees do I have in my yard. And we went around the room and we created a list. And I'm just going to, for demonstration's sake, I'm going to say, let's say 5 people in this room gave us the total number of trees in their yard. And the first person said, okay, well, I have 12 trees in my yard. And then the second person said, well, I've got 4 trees. And then the third person said, well, I probably have about 22 trees. And then the fourth person said, well, I have about 7. And then do you remember, we asked Rowan how many trees he had. And he said, well, I could never count, but I could probably estimate that I had about 200 trees. And we noticed that since this value is so high, it's going to really affect the overall average. We call that an outlier, an outlying value. Sometimes when you're finding the average of different values, there will be a number that's way higher or way lower, and that will affect the overall average. So when we calculated, so let's say we're going to calculate the average of these 5 people's, what is the average number of trees in their yard? So we would add all of these 5 people's totals up to get one large total, and when you do that, you would get 245. So that's your total. And then to find the average, again, you are going to take the total and you're going to divide it by the number of groups. Well, how many number of groups are? What's the number of groups? Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 people that gave us their estimates for the number of trees in their yard. So when you divide 245 by 5, you should get 49. So the average number of trees in these 5 people's yards is 49. Now let's go back and use that rule of thumb that I mentioned a while ago. Your average cannot be less than the lowest value. Well, no, this is the lowest value, 4. Okay, well, it's obviously not less than that, so that's good. It also cannot be greater than the greatest value. The greatest value is 200. It's obviously not greater than that. But as you can see, that 200 is an outlier. It really affected the overall average, because if you were just calculating the average of these 4 numbers without the 200, the average would be a lot lower, as you can see. But when you added in that 5th value of 200, which is an outlying value, it greatly affected the average. Okay, now the next thing I want to talk about is calculating average when there's a decimal number. So now we're going to go back to page 40 in your textbook. We're going to look at number 4. So, number 4 says, and let me move this up a little bit here. So we're going to be looking at string length here. And it says, the lengths of 5 strings are 1.4 meters, 1.8 meters, 2 meters, 2.6 meters. Did I say 4? I meant 5 strings. The lengths of 5 strings are 1.4 meters, 1.8 meters, 2 meters, 2.6 meters, and 3.2 meters. 2 questions. A, what is the total length of the 5 strings? Okay, so, well, first part is fairly simple. All you're going to do is add up your values there. So you have 1.4 meters. Don't forget your units. 1.8 meters plus 2 meters plus 2.6 meters plus 3.2 meters. And when you calculate this, go off to the side, do your algorithm, maybe add a couple of values up at a time. But you should calculate that the total amount, the total length is 11 meters when you add all of those string lengths together. So that's your total. So we've done A. That was pretty simple. Now B says, what is their average length? Well, again, to calculate average, I'm just going to take my total and I'm going to divide it by the number of groups. Well, I have 5 strings, so I'm going to take 11 meters. Let me write first that the average equals 11 meters divided by 5. Well, you can see that you're not going to be getting an even number. So you're going to go off to the side, do your algorithm. 11 divided by 5. So 5 goes into 11 2 times. It gives you 10. You have 1 remainder. Well, you can append a 0. Bring that down and rename this as 10 tenths. 5 will go into 10 tenths 2 times for 10 tenths with no remainder. So, therefore, my answer is 2.2 meters is the average length of those 5 strings. Okay, next example here. Let's look at another one like this. So now I'm going to be looking at number 5 on page 40. So here's an example of calculating the average of some grades. Let me move this down a little bit here. So, all right, number 5 on page 40 says, the table shows the points scored by Ron for 4 tests. And we've got 2 questions. A, what is the total score for the 4 tests? And B, what is his average score? Okay, so the first part's pretty easy. We just take the 4 tests, test A, B, C, and D, and we just add them together. So for A, you can follow along with me and calculate as well. The total is going to be equal to 68 plus 76 plus 78 plus 88. Again, you're going to need to do probably your algorithm out to the side. And when you add those together for number 5, you should get that the total is 310 points that he scored for those 4 tests. That's his total. Now B says, what is his average score? Well, again, to find the average, you're going to take the total and you're going to divide it by the number of groups. Well, there are 4 tests, so there are 4 groups. So 310 divided by 4 is going to be your average. So again, you're going to need to come off to the side, do your algorithm for long division. 4 goes into 31 tens 7 times, gives you 28 tens with a remainder of 3. Drop down the 0, you now have 31s. 4 goes into 37 times, gives you 28 ones with a remainder of 2. Now you can append a 0. Rename this as 20 tenths. 4 goes into 20 tenths 5 times for no remainder. So, therefore, his average is 77.5 for his average score. Okay, so I'm going to stop the video here for a moment here and let you just look back over this, make sure you understand this portion of it because I just reviewed the first 2 lessons. I want to go ahead in the next video and review the 3rd lesson as well because, again, this is review. We've already done this. You've already done these practice exercises in your workbook. So go ahead and watch the next video on finding the total.